Welcome to rSlash Nuclearrevenge, where we literally have a murder. Our next Reddit post is from Deleted. This is my grandfather's story, so it would have occurred sometime in the early 1960s. My grandpa comes from a very remote part of my country. Even in the 60s, they lived in a log cabin without a phone or electricity. He lived with his 3 brothers, his sister, his father, and his mother. It was a violent household. My great-grandfather was an alcoholic. My grandpa, his siblings, and his mother were accustomed to beatings. The culture of the time was to accept this as a harsh reality of the remote and difficult lives that were led so far from civilization. My great-aunt was the youngest of the siblings, and as my grandpa and his brothers grew into young men and began working, she was left at home and began to take on the role of housekeeper because my great-grandmother was often ill. She would often use her bad health as an excuse for not stopping what happened next. My great-grandfather began forcing himself on my great-aunt at some point, most likely before she had even started puberty. This continued for years as the brothers all moved out and she was left completely alone. My grandpa says that he truly didn't know, that he was worried for his sister receiving the brunt of the beatings, but he didn't know about that part. I hope that's true. When my great-aunt was 13, she became pregnant with her father's son. The night that my grandpa found out, him and his brothers snowmobiled out from the town. And since none of them owned a gun, they used shovels to beat their father to death. The ground was frozen solid, so they burned him, which also helped to destroy the evidence, I suppose. Although, I'm not sure anyone ever questioned how my great-grandfather had died, as these were very different times. My great-aunt's son, born of incest, is afflicted with genetic issues. He can barely see, and he only has a single functioning kidney. But he's happy and has healthy kids in their 20s now. My great-aunt drank herself to death in the 80s, as did my great-grandfather, so I never met them. My grandpa told me all about this when he was drunk, as he had also become an alcoholic. So has my dad. The generational trauma of my family is thankfully now broken with me and my siblings. But this revenge murder, this disgusting hurt, was really just another sad piece of a puzzle of abuse that started long ago. That disgusting man probably thought to himself, I live in such a secluded place, I can get away with whatever I want out here. And all of his sons were like, you know what? Good point, Dad. We can get away with whatever we want out here. Like, for example, murder. Our next Reddit post is from Hunting the Wumpus. Many years ago, I got a job with a marketing company doing phone deregulation. It was the Wild West, and a lot of small, long-distance companies sprang up, all trying to get a piece of the pie. Eventually, they all got bought up by a bigger fish, but at the time, they were all paying hired gun marketing firms very well to score contracts for them to lock people in. I got a job with one of those marketing firms, a new age capitalism company that insisted we all do yoga and breathing exercises while they rang a little bell and gave us affirmations about how many contracts we were going to sell and how much money we'd all make. The job was 100% commission, but I was always good at sales, so I looked at the pay scale and noticed that it was exponential, presumably to entice people to work hard with impossible payouts. We were allowed to work as many or as few hours as we wanted, with the payout based on your weekly sales numbers. I decided I would give it a shot for 1 week to see how much I could realistically make before deciding whether I was willing to put up with tasteless vegan snacks and mandatory voluntary yoga time. For the next week, I pushed myself as hard as I could. For 7 straight days, I worked 14-hour days every single day and used every trick and technique I learned doing sales to score as many contracts as I possibly could. I figured this would tell me my maximum possible income, and I could decide on that basis whether or not to stay. At the end of the week, I had blown everyone else out of the water. In fact, I hadn't just gotten more contracts than anyone there had ever seen in a week. I'd gotten more than any of them had seen in a month. Because of the exponential scale, I realized that I was making absolutely ridiculous amounts of money, like $10,000 a week. They had never expected anyone could actually hit those kinds of numbers. Coming in the next week, expecting a huge payday, I ended up with about 5% of what I expected. They told me there were problems with a lot of my contracts and that I would be allowed to fix them and submit them a few at a time over the next several weeks. These problems were things like an apostrophe wasn't quite clear or the dash in someone's phone number was slightly crooked. They were trying to screw me. That night, I got a phone call from the company's office manager, Frank, who wanted to meet up for a drink. Curious, I agreed. Over beers, Frank told me that the owners of the company were in a panic because I would have bankrupted them. He said they spread out all my contracts on the floor of the office, then they crawled over them, inspecting each one and trying to figure out if I was committing some kind of fraud. When they realized that all my contracts were legit, they decided they had no choice but to screw me over. Frank told me that he realized at that point that if they would screw me, they would screw him too. And besides, he was tired of doing yoga. He asked me if I would be interested in going into business with him and go head-to-head with his bosses. I thought it sounded intriguing, but I asked him how he thought that we could compete. Frank explained that he found out they didn't actually have the contract for our city. They were acting as independent contractors for another company who did have the contract to market the service in an entirely different city. They were poaching here because the person who did have the contract wasn't actively using it. We put together a pitch and approached the guy with the real contract, Joe, and told him about the people poaching his turf. We agreed that we'd split it with him. We'd take the upfront money for each contract, and he'd get the back-end money down the road. It was a good deal for everyone. So Joe contacted the phone company and had them threaten the poachers with a big lawsuit if they didn't stop. A week later, Frank and I strolled into the offices of our old employer. Most of the furniture and all the yoga mats were gone, and there was just a table, a couple of filing cabinets, and a file box with the final pay envelope for everyone. I made a show of counting my money to make sure it was all there, and the two owners, a husband and wife, told Frank and I bitterly that they had to take cash advances on their credit cards for this money, and they asked me if I felt guilty for destroying their lives. I smiled, said, "Nope," and left. Our marketing company made us a lot of money over the years, until the company got bought up by Sprint and the gravy train ended. Our next Reddit post is from Hector Moriarty. This is the story of the time that I ruined the life of an online troll. Now, this may sound extreme, however, I believe that it was justified given the circumstances and nature of my encounter. To understand how I found this individual, I need to take you back to 2015. Back then, I would spend my days Googling pointless topics. One day, I decided to look up opinions on the meaning of life. I scrolled through various pages of search engine results until I came across the concept of nihilism. What is nihilism? Nihilism interested me because it was unlike any other belief that I found on my search for the meaning of life. To put it simply, nihilism is the belief that the world is meaningless. It is a pessimistic approach to life, which suggests that there's no point in life because nothing holds real relevance. I wanted to speak to a real-life nihilist and hear their opinions on life. What I found shocked me. Upon discovering nihilism, I joined several Facebook groups surrounding the topic. These groups were full of dark humor and memes that made fun of life and death. Comments such as, "Existence is misery," were common to see. In these groups, I came across a few genuine nihilists. The community was predominantly made up of people who were depressed, or people who would see the humor in depression. The nihilist approach meant that depression wasn't important because nothing is relevant. This was why suicide jokes were a hit in nihilism groups. I found that the constant sharing of suicide memes meant that people became desensitized to death. People would believe that their existence was meaningless, which was not a good thought to have if you were dealing with genuine depression. I spoke to one individual privately who said that they didn't want to live anymore. They told me, "The world isn't real, but my sadness is." This made me realize that nihilism and depression are a bad combination. I reassured this person and told them they were important. A few months later, I went to get in touch to see how they were getting on, but I discovered that their Facebook account had vanished. Fast forward to mid-2016, and I get a Facebook notification from one of the nihilist groups. It was someone seeking genuine advice to unalive themselves. They said they wanted their death to be peaceful, but they were scared. Upon checking the comments of the post, I noticed one person advising them to run into an oncoming train, as this would be painless and fast. The person giving the advice was the troll whose life I went on to ruin. I'll call this guy Nigel. At the time, I thought that Nigel was being edgy for the sake of it, but this was not the case. I decided to look up posts and comments made by Nigel in this group. All of his comments turned out to be methods for depressed people to unalive themselves. Nigel would give people reassurance that death was the only way out. He would pretend that he was doing the people a favor. A distraught man posted that he was ashamed that he kept failing in his attempts. Nigel told him not to beat himself up about it, and that if he works hard, one day he'll be able to do it. I realized that Nigel was not your ordinary troll, and that I had to do something to stop him. I created a fake profile to contact Nigel. At this point, I had no intention to ruin his life. I just wanted to stop him ruining the lives of others. On my fake profile, I told him that I had seen his comments and that they could have a devastating effect. He replied to tell me that he didn't care. From my understanding, Nigel had the belief that depression was a weakness to humanity. It appeared that he was on a mission to weed out the weak members of society. It was almost like he got a buzz from it, some weird kick that motivated him to do it that I couldn't understand. I warned Nigel that if it continued, there would be repercussions. He told me that he didn't care and then blocked my fake profile. I logged into my genuine profile and checked for new posts by Nigel. A day later, I saw that he was back to his old tricks. He was, yet again, giving suicide advice to another mentally tortured soul. Nigel had made a crucial mistake by not setting his Facebook profile to private. I was able to see every post that he had ever made, as well as the friends that he had. Nigel was a family man and made it clear on Facebook how much his wife meant to him. I decided that I would give Nigel his second warning. This time, I'd make it personal. This time, I wanted to put fear into him. Within 10 minutes, I was able to find Nigel's home address. I decided that I would write a letter to his address. This letter was handwritten to add a personal touch. On the envelope, I addressed the letter to his wife's name so that he wouldn't be able to simply brush it under the carpet. The letter read, "Your husband continues to encourage suicide online. He provides methods of suicide for depressed people, and he must be stopped. Could you please let him know that this is his final warning? I'll be watching." This letter was sent with the intention to make Nigel stop doing what he does. I thought that this would be the only way that I could get through to him. The more I thought about it, the more I felt guilty that his wife might be living in fear. This was something that I didn't take into consideration initially. My mission to stop Nigel clouded my thoughts, however, and I knew that this was necessary for the greater good. It had been a month since I wrote the letter, and I hadn't seen a single post from Nigel. I thought maybe I'd finally gotten through to him, but I was wrong. Another month passed, and Nigel was back at it again. I was disappointed. However, I was not prepared to give up. I reached out to the depressed victims to let them know that they had my support. Nigel had to pay for his actions, but how? I decided to take a deeper look into Nigel's life. His use of the internet meant that his life was essentially an open book. I was stunned when I discovered that he worked at a care home. He was not someone that I could trust in society to care for others. I knew I had to deliver the final blow. Nigel's LinkedIn profile revealed that he was a senior member at a care home. This care home was reputable and risked their reputation by hiring him. I dug deep to pull out a barrage of screenshots that I had of Nigel's activity online. After some contemplation, I decided that I would get in touch with the care home via their Facebook page. I logged into the fake profile via a proxy and sent the screenshots. A member of staff replied to say the case had been handed over to the CEO. A week later, Nigel was no longer on the company website and had also removed the care home from his LinkedIn page. It was clear that his actions had caused him to lose his job. Nigel's relationship status on Facebook changed from "in a relationship" to "it's complicated." In almost an instant, he had lost his job and damaged his relationship with his family. Nigel had completely stopped posting on Facebook and eventually shut his Facebook account down. This guy's life was turned upside down, and it all stemmed from his actions online. I have comfort in knowing that he will never encourage suicide again. Everybody has the right to an opinion, but nobody has the right to prey on the vulnerable. Do I feel guilty? Of course. But then I remember all the people that he sought to destroy. This man was in a position of care. What if my actions had saved the life of someone? It's these thoughts that make my guilt fade away. You know, OP, I don't want to overly glorify OP here, but it's also possible that OP might have inadvertently helped this guy, because I think you can actually be prosecuted for encouraging someone to unalive themselves, and then if they actually do unalive themselves, you can be charged, depending on your location, of course. So yeah, OP did destroy the guy's life, but it's also possible he spared him like a jail sentence. Our next Reddit post is from Educational Gap. I was an adjunct professor at a college. One of the students didn't seem to take a liking to me and tried to get me fired by making false accusations that I had pinched and caressed her hair. I did not take this lightly. I could have been fired and faced criminal charges. This student was on a scholarship that required her to pass all units by her second attempt. Our college also requires a minimum attendance to pass a unit. This was her second attempt at this unit, as she had attempted and dropped out of another course before. So, an eye for an eye, right? I accidentally forgot to mark her name down when taking attendance, even if she was there. A few weeks later, she was gone. I was confronted by her friend that she had lost her scholarship and was now living out of her car because of my carelessness in taking attendance. Little did they know. That was r/Nuclearrevenge, and if you like this content, check out my podcast where I publish the exact same episodes. Also, hit that subscribe button because I put out new Reddit videos every single day.